Now on to Mario Draghi calls for new European industrial policy. Now, Mario Draghi is the former Prime Minister of Italy. He's a technocrat. He's been an economist, professor. He's worked in Goldman Sachs. So clearly he's very sharp. I meant that
Never trust
ironically
anybody
too.
with Goldman Sachs. That's a rule that I tried to have imposed in the American government. Of course, I'm being facetious, but that you should never trust anyone coming out of high finance, and they should never hold any political power whatsoever.
Anyway, Mario Draghi was president of the European Central Bank from 2011 to 2019. President of European Commission Ursula von der Leyen asked Draghi to submit a highly anticipated report on European competitiveness. Former Italian Prime Minister / Goldman Sachs banker submitted his nearly 400-page report this month and made headlines in Europe. So why this lengthy report, this big tome? Well, simply, Europeans were increasingly worried about the future. I was in Europe for a wedding just before I came to Japan, and there was great unease even in prosperous Bavaria, in Munich, in Austria, in Vienna. People I met at the wedding came from all over Europe. And why is there unease about the future? Well, Europe's lack of growth and innovation threaten the European way of life. The nice operas you have, the long holidays you have, the fantastic cafes, the general ambience in Europe of a more even-keeled, more balanced way of life compared to the US, or for that matter, East Asia, is certainly under threat. Now, the world has changed, as many Europeans say, and Europe has to change too. Both the US and China are increasingly protectionist and promote their industries. Europe has fallen behind. Productivity has gone down from 95% of American productivity in 1995 to 80% of American productivity today. So European productivity has been falling. Not only do Europeans not work long enough, but they are also less productive. There is also the problem of inefficient capital markets. 75% of corporate borrowing in Europe comes from banks. The figure for the US is 25%. And because the US is deeper and more liquid capital markets, it has the ability to have more startups, more companies, and therefore a better growth engine for its economy than Europe. Europe is behind in AI, artificial intelligence. That's what we mean by AI: electric cars, self-driving vehicles, and all things tech. In fact, Yanis Varoufakis, the former Greek finance minister and an economist as well, often talks about Europe being very much a vassal state or vassal region under American techno feudal overlordship. So there is great unease in Europe, and therefore this 400-page report, or nearly 400-page report. And the report says that the EU needs to focus on three crucial issues. Number one, close the innovation gap with the US and China. Number two, develop a joint plan to link the goal of decarbonization with increased competitiveness. And number three, boost Europe's security and reduce its dependence on foreign economic powers. Now, this sounds wonderfully nice, like the 1960s free love and world peace that hippies wanted. But Draghi's report actually has specifics too. In fact, the former Goldman banker has given, or the Goldman Sachs employee has given figures too. Draghi's report calls for 800 billion euros to be spent for a new industrial strategy for Europe. Marks a significant shift in economic policy and further underscores the end of the post-1991 Cold War era. Why? Because it means now that everyone is jumping on the industrial policy bandwagon, which was once regarded as inefficient by free trade economists. But let's get back to the report. The report proposes wholesale overhaul of investment funding in the EU, relaxing competition rules to enable market consolidation in sectors such as telecommunications and banking, greater integration of capital markets, and centralized market supervision, joint procurement in defense, a new trade agenda for the EU, a new European advanced research projects or new European advanced research projects agencies, DARPAs, based on the US model. The US came up with the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, DARPA, which led to the internet, amongst other things. Kevlar, I'm told. Kevlar came from the space research. Anyway, lots of spin-offs from there. And that is what Europe wants. Following on from that, the report calls for spending big on world-leading research institutions. And finally, and of course, this is not final in the report. There are many, many, many things. The report proposes. 400 pages is a lot to summarize here. The important figure to remember is that Europe needs investment by the private and public sectors to rise from today's 22% of the GDP to 27% of the GDP. And Draghi told members of the European Parliament, MEPs, Europe faces a choice between exit, paralysis, or integration. Exit, of course, he's harking to Brexit. Integration, and of course, paralysis or integration. Now, as I mentioned earlier, industrial policy is now in fashion. The policy, once regarded as outdated, is now the mantra for the US, the EU, China, not just these big dogs, but also smaller countries like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam, and India. So the zeitgeist has certainly changed. Draghi and his allies in Europe want to make Europe a bit more European, but there are flies in the ointment. Questions such as, will the European countries integrate in sensitive sectors such as defense, banking, or telecoms? So we'll see. We don't know. Two more questions. Will the famously fractious Europeans be able to overcome their differences? And finally, the third question, the $800 billion question. Can the EC, the European Commission, spend the sums or raise the sums that Draghi proposes? Yes, Glenn, over to you.
Well, it sounds like Mario Draghi has become a Frenchman from the 1980s, or a Frenchman tout court.
Like Jacques Delors. Jacques Delors was talking about these things back in 1993.
This is the great debate for Europe. Should Europe become a super state, or should it be like the British always argued, a common market at most, which even the British now reject and then regret that they rejected. But that's another subject. So how is this moment and Draghi's proposal different from the debate that that Europe has not been able to resolve for the past 50 or 75 years? Now, how can, assuming that it should, Europe integrate economically, politically, and militarily, which is what this is arguing for, and why is now different than during Jacques Delors' time, or Charles de Gaulle's, or whomever's?
I think that's a great question, Glenn, and the answer is simple, that Europe has never felt as weak as it feels now. The Russia-Ukraine war hit German industry very hard. It also was hit North Italian industry. The two big industrial areas in Europe, ironically, have been North Italy, which makes Ferrari, Maserati, lots of other high-tech, well-designed stuff. And of course, Germany. Of course, the Netherlands do very well in semiconductors. The Danes are in shipping. Lego, the Scandinavians have a very robust economy. But um, rising cost of energy hurt everyone. Also, um, Europeans suddenly lost leadership in things like electric cars, which came as a huge jolt to them. Uh, yes, BMW makes some. When I go around London, I see the police in those cars, but they simply cannot compete with BYD or Tesla. So there is great unease in Europe, and the report may never eventually uh, be applied, or Western interests, identity politics may kick in, interest groups may take over. The report is unprecedented in the level of detail and the clarion call of the crisis. So I think that is not something Charles de Gaulle felt, because they still had colonies, and even though they were losing them, but they were still top dogs. Not top dogs, but they were still important big dogs. And now they feel that they are small dogs who don't matter. So they are forming a pack.
I would posit, I guess, that three issues may make European integration more possible now than at any time in its history. And each of the three things is, if not an existential threat, at least one of the among the greatest threats that Europe has faced. One is Russia's invasion of Ukraine and how that changes Europe's perception of security. Two is the rise of China, so that just as Detroit was devastated and learned some hard lessons when the Japanese started producing the best cars in the world in the 70s and 80s. So Europe and everywhere in the world has to respond to somehow, or try to, China's gargantuan, stupendous growth and challenge. And then three is the demographic challenge. America's growth can sustain growth better than any other developed country or region. It can really be attributed to its immigration, legal and illegal. And Europe has also large immigration, very recent, creating political problems, as immigration tends to do everywhere, because of the destruction of the Middle East by the invasion of Iraq and their own demographic issues. But Europe faces, as everywhere does, but Europe in the lead after Russia and now China, a demographic challenge that makes sustained growth almost impossible. And those three challenges possibly could make Europe able to take the substantive decisions that it has been unable to do in its history, although it's not at all guaranteed. I would
think,
argue.
yeah, that's true. And I think Europeans um, in positions of power, people like Draghi, who clearly served in the ECB, who see themselves as part of the European elite, recognize that if they go around representing Italy, or they go around representing Belgium, or they go around representing even France, um, they will not have much heft in trade negotiations. After all, um, why would China concede to tiny France, relatively tiny France, on, say, French cheese? But if
Well, there,
France,
I don't quite go there. I mean, Europe has been a
no, but
superpower
hold,
economic.
the point is, but if EU negotiates a trade deal, together, they have much greater heft. That is the point I'm making. And there's the internal side as well. Now the rise of the far right. Let's look at Marine Le Pen, who in the first round won more votes than any established political party. Her party won more votes, Rassemblement National. AFD has won the most votes, yes, admittedly in an former East German state, Hollande. They have. Slovakia has Robert Fico. Hungary has Viktor Orban. So the reality is that this concentrates the mind too. If the economy does not deliver, and part of the reason the far right has risen is the economy is stupid, then the European project could be in question. And the elephant in the room is a very big one. Will the Danes, will the Dutch, will the Germans, will North Europeans be willing to be on the hook for Southern European debt with the declining demography?
So I hope that Europe does not end up a euro short and a day late, but
yeah, but so that is why this plan is significant, because this is an attempt to grapple with clear and present danger with a crisis. So whether they succeed or not, we will see. But lest we forget, some European industrial strategy has paid off, and Airbus industry is a classic example. It's done much better than Boeing. So I wouldn't just shrug my shoulders and just scoff at the Europeans and say, oh, they are bound to fail, because they have. Europe as a continent has pulled through many crises, and I wouldn't be writing the Europeans off just yet.
Agreed.
All right, Glenn. On that happy note, and I think after the first and second topics, which were less cheery, we can at least end on a more optimistic note, and we will see everyone next month, when we'll be much closer to the American election. Meanwhile, if you're watching us, make sure you subscribe to our newsletter. Make sure that you follow us on social media, like us here, like our video here, subscribe to our channel, and if you want to support independent journalism, even if you're a student, you can always sign up for $11 a year. It's less than $1 a month. Certainly less than the price of coffee you probably drink every month. All right, on that note, it's bye for now.
We leave you in a world in flux.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.